Welcome back, America.
Today, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Gordon Brown, made his first visit to Iraq, where he announced the withdrawal of 1,000 troops.
In other news, the Dow Jones went up 96.94 points today, closing at 14,066.01 points. Nasdaq went up 4.83 points today, closing at 2,780.32 points. And now, our special on Alan Greenspan.
Alan Greenspan was born March 6, 1926 to Herbert Greenspan and Rose Goldsmith in New York City, New York. His father, a stockbroker and market analyst, introduced him to the business.
In 1952, Alan Greenspan married Joanne Mitchell, but they annulled their marriage 10 months later. However, during their time together, Joanne introduced Alan to Ayn Rand, who introduced him to her idea of objectivism.
He was very influenced by her ideas and wrote articles for objectivist newsletters. He also contributed several essays for Rand's books, Capitalism, The Unknown Ideal.
He studied at New York University. From here, he obtained a degree in economics. He worked as an economics analyst at the National Industrial Conference Board.
In 1954, Greenspan partnered with William Townsend to form Townsend and Greenspan and Company. This was an economic consulting firm, which he stayed as chairman and president for over 20 years. However, the company closed when he was appointed chairman of the Federal Reserve because he couldn't find a buyer for the company. Later,
Greenspan advised Presidents Nixon and Carter and had a term on President Ford's Council of Economic Advisors.
President Ronald Reagan appointed him to be successor of Paul Volcker as chairman of the Federal Reserve. He was sworn into office August 11, 1987.
Shortly after he was sworn into office, the stock market crashed, which would later be known as Black Monday. Alan Greenspan knew that if he didn't counter the crash, the U.S. financial system would fall to its knees. Greenspan quickly and efficiently gathered a team, and by Tuesday morning, the stock market was regulated.
In the early fall of 1987, the American economy was booming, and the new head of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, was watching it like a hawk. By Friday, October 16, 1987, computer trading models were ordering investors to sell, and a massive unloading had begun.
Panic selling hits Wall Street.
3 days later, Black Monday, October 19, 1987. In the first 2 hours of trading, the Dow was off more than 200 points. Alan Greenspan turned his office at Federal Reserve in Washington into a command post and convened a crisis planning committee he had only just formed. Alan Greenspan then made the most important decision of his career. He issued a one-sentence statement 50 minutes before the start of trade Tuesday. It promised the Federal Reserve would provide ample credit to institutions facing a cash crisis.
He used a magical formula which people in finance understood. And what he was saying was to the bankers, when you get a call from the stockbrokers, lend them money. Sure, you're going to lose money, but we'll pay you back. We'll make you whole. Lend them money.
It was a dramatic and risky decision, one that went against the grain of the dedicated inflation buster. Tuesday, Greenspan met with concerned White House officials, then was back in his war room at the Federal Reserve, coolly manning the phones. By close on Tuesday, the market was stable and the crisis had passed. And Alan Greenspan now settled comfortably into his new job.
Greenspan inflated the money supply non-stop throughout his whole term at the Federal Reserve. Interest rates fell again and again, with Greenspan claiming that there was neither a stock market bubble nor a housing bubble.
In all this time, Greenspan never considered inflation to be a serious or potential problem. Instead of recognizing money supply inflation as a problem, he just created complicated theories to explain why inflation was not a problem, and why growth would provide a fail-safe protection against price inflation.
However, Greenspan's most famous theory was his productivity theory. His theory was that productivity, due to new technologies, would prevent imbalances in the economy from such massively loose monetary policy. This theory allowed Greenspan to claim there was hidden wealth being created behind the gloomy statistics. Greenspan's economic strategy was easy money in the form of subterranean interest rates, microscopic reserve requirements, and endless price of debt.
The reason politicians liked Greenspan so much more than other economists is because he provided them with what they wanted to hear: easy money, inflation, and at least the appearance of an economic boom. Politicians wanted a man who was willing to always say yes to that everything was going right. And Greenspan was the perfect man for the job.
Greenspan mumbled and evaded every question that was asked to him, but there was the feeling that Greenspan seemed to understand things that the rest of humanity didn't understand. People accepted the idea that he possessed supernatural powers in fine-tuning the economy to ensure economic prosperity.
One of Greenspan's few actual contributions to the field of free market economics was his 1966 essay, Gold and Economic Freedom, which provides an eloquent defense of gold and sound money.
One of Greenspan's beliefs was monetarism. Monetarism, the view that money supply growth had to be kept stable in order to keep the economy stable.
Monetarism is a commonly known philosophy of macroeconomics, often associated with Milton Friedman, but it's actually centuries old. Monetarism is the view that money supply growth really matters for the business cycle. Milton Friedman in particular advocated a regime where money supply growth would be kept very stable. In his opinion, if money supply growth was too rapid, you would get excess inflation. If money supply growth was too slow, you would get a downturn, because Friedman, like John Maynard Keynes, believed a lot of wages and prices were sticky, and thus decreasing that nominal flow of expenditure would cause an economy to contract. Friedman was famous for suggesting that the Great Depression was largely caused because in the period 1929 through 1932, the Federal Reserve allowed the money supply in this country to contract very radically. Here's a good example of an economic downturn that came about and can be partially explained by monetarism. In 1979 in the United States, rates of price inflation and rates of interest were very high. Paul Volcker, who was running the Federal Reserve System, decided inflation was too high and he applied the monetary brakes, so to speak. This was probably necessary, but it meant strong deflationary pressures on the American economy, and from 1979 to 1982, we had a sharp downturn with a lot of unemployment, and a lot of that can be explained by monetarist doctrine. What are the strengths and weaknesses of monetarism? The biggest strength of monetarism, I think, is that it predicts a lot of cases where the central bank pulls back on money supply growth, and economies then slow down or go into recession, and monetarism is a fairly good explanation of how that happens. Monetarism, however, has bigger weaknesses when trying to explain what we should do to prevent this. The core recipe of monetarism is to control the rate of growth of the money supply. But which money supply? There are different measures of the money supply. They don't all move in tandem. And in practice, central banks have found it's not very easy to follow some simple rule of saying the money supply should grow 3% a year or anything like that. That hasn't worked in practice. It tends to lead to too much volatility. So in terms of policy prescriptions, monetarism is a bit naive, but its core diagnosis that deflationary pressures lead to downturns is essentially correct.
Greenspan criticized American consumers for not spending enough on consumer goods and real estate. He believed that consumer spending was essential regardless of where one got the money.
Even though Greenspan is retired, Greenspanism is still alive and well in Ben Bernanke, Greenspan's successor.
Today, those who still defend Greenspan's policies, if not the man himself, maintain that no one predicted the bubble and the crash. Of course, this is not true. But since Greenspan said everything was fine, those with actual insight were ignored.
Good night and have a wonderful evening. 3, 2, 1, action.
Like what? Welcome back, America.
Go.
Welcome back, America.
Today, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Gordon Brown,
To go take a nap because I have working 2 hours.